Hello and welcome. Today our guest is Alexander Grace from Red Pill Interviews. Alexander, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, in the past, we've mostly spoken about the dynamics between men and women in the areas of dating and relationships, but I understand that you want to start discussing male sexuality.
That's right. I think it's very important to talk about the sexual preferences that men have and then explain the psychological reasons why those preferences are so appealing.
Are you sure that's a good idea? I think people like having their sexuality remain a mystery. If you start analysing the psychology behind specific sexual preferences, won't you be taking some of the fun out of it?
From my experience, people who understand their sexuality don't derive any less pleasure from the act, but what is removed is any shame or guilt that might have been attached to their sexual preferences.
Is that common? That men feel guilt and shame about their sexuality?
It's really common, and it's terrible for your self-esteem. When men don't understand their sexuality, too often they listen to the culture around them. They conclude that they're creeps or that they're perverts, even though their sexuality is completely normal.
So you want to remove the stigma around male sexuality?
Yes. I want to promote an empowered and celebrated male sexuality.
So where do we begin?
I want to begin with big breasts. Though this isn't a preference that every man shares, there are a lot of men who get very excited by a woman with big breasts, and I want to talk about why that is.
I always assumed that men liked breasts just because they were covered up all the time. It's like a secret room that you can't enter, so you desperately want to go inside and take a look.
That's part of it for sure. The same goes for women's butts and vaginas. See, these things were always covered up, so as a young boy, you develop a very intense curiosity about them. The arousal that you feel is stimulated by the taboo of looking at a forbidden body part.
So what about young boys who grow up in native tribes where the women still walk around topless?
I haven't asked them, but I can imagine that they don't find them as stimulating as men in the developed world do. Because when you're exposed to something day in and day out, it loses its forbidden fruit appeal.
Some people might say that even in the developed world, we're exposed to breasts on a much more regular basis. Just look at the media, it's completely saturated with images of half-naked women, and there's that Free the Nipple campaign that's designed to remove the taboo around women being topless in public.
It's true, we're exposed to breasts way more now than we would have been 50 years ago. Personally, I think that's great, but I can also see that the long-term impact of that will be to reduce the feeling of specialness that you used to get when you saw a girl topless for the first time.
So you mentioned that you wanted to talk about big breasts specifically.
Yes, so every man likes breasts, but there's a particular type of man who gets especially excited by a woman with big breasts, and it's this particular fetish that I want to discuss.
I wouldn't have called liking big breasts a fetish. That makes it sound like it's something weird. Liking big breasts is pretty normal.
Sure, allow me to explain. When I use the term fetish, I'm not using the layman's definition, I'm using the technical one. So, a fetish is when, for the purpose of sexual gratification, you reduce something human to the status of an object, or conversely, you imbue an object or a specific body part with human qualities, as in the case with big breasts.
Are you saying that men personify big breasts in some way?
Yes, and that's why they have a sexual appeal, because of what they psychologically represent. There might be a few men who just enjoy the physical sensation of interacting with big breasts, but for most men who have this particular preference, the appeal is psychological.
So what is the psychological appeal of big breasts?
Before I answer that, I need to put in a disclaimer. No two human brains are the same, and it is impossible to universally account for why all these different people would have a specific sexual preference. The human brain is the biggest sexual organ in the body, and human sexuality is a weird and wonderful thing with thousands of variations.
Okay, so we're never going to account for every situation, but generally speaking, what is the psychological appeal of big breasts?
To answer that, we need to look at what breasts symbolize in an archetypal sense, which is generosity. And it makes sense too. When you look at the female body, the breasts are the part specifically designed to serve the needs of others. They produce milk so that others can drink. They are literally and symbolically the fountain of life.
Okay, so breasts symbolize generosity. Why does that have such an appeal for men though?
Understand this. In order to feel sexual, you need to feel safe. So it's impossible to feel aroused if you're stressed or frightened. You need to be relaxed.
Are you saying that men like big breasts because it makes them feel safe to be around something that symbolizes generosity?
That's exactly what I'm saying. There are so many men in this culture who have an image of the feminine as something dangerous, something cold and selfish, something that's always taking from you.
Where would men get this idea?
It's not difficult to find evidence. For a lot of men, their experience of women is one of cold selfishness. When they get rejected by the women that they approach, when they get taken advantage of in relationships, just by living in this culture, their experience of women is anything but generous. Women can be cruel.
So, just through interacting with society, men come to associate the feminine with selfishness and withholding.
It's not only through the culture. A lot of this has to do with what a man's relationship was like with his mother. Now, people don't like to talk about their childhood, and they don't like to admit that their relationship with their parents has had much impact upon their adult selves. But it's important to note that the strongest impression men have of the feminine was formed very early on in their relationship with their mother.
So, what kind of a relationship would a boy need to have with his mum that would lead to him having a thing for big breasts?
Well, if a boy's mother is cold, uncaring, withholding, critical, then that's the impression that he's going to form of the feminine. Therefore, in order to counteract that and feel safe, he's going to fantasize about women who are warm, kind, and generous. And often this manifests as a fetish for big breasts, which are the ultimate symbol of feminine generosity.
I hear what you're saying, but it sounds a bit far-fetched to me. I think that we're attracted to breasts just because of biological reasons. Maybe big breasts are a sign that a woman can raise healthy babies, and we're attracted to them just because of our animal instincts.
Please don't let what I'm saying be misinterpreted as being overly simplistic, as if there were no other relevant factors. Of course there are biological reasons as well.
But you think that it's important to acknowledge what's going on psychologically?
Yes. Many men feel unsafe around women because they experience the feminine as cold, selfish, and uncaring. They develop a fetish for big breasts because big breasts symbolize warmth, kindness, and generosity. That makes them feel safe, and safety is a necessary precondition for arousal.
Couldn't they fixate on something else? Does it have to be big breasts?
No, it could be anything. Big breasts is a very common one, but it could be that a man enjoys his girlfriend dressing up like a nurse, because for him a nurse is what symbolizes generosity. For another man it could be the color pink. It's going to be different for every man because the brain forms its symbolic associations based on its unique life experiences.
So it's not important exactly what the brain chooses to associate with feminine kindness and generosity.
Right. It's just important to know that if a man fears the feminine because he has an image of it as cold and uncaring and selfish, then his fantasies are going to revolve around creating a new image of the feminine, one that's warm and generous.
Do women know why men like big breasts? Do they understand their psychological appeal?
I doubt it. I don't think it goes much further than just noticing that men like breasts. I mean, they're definitely aware of that simple fact. That's why they wear low-cut tops before a big night out.
But all they're doing is showing off their body. They're not actually trying to consciously embody the archetype of the generous feminine.
Well, it's complicated. Perhaps it doesn't happen consciously, but unconsciously, I think it happens all the time. See, when a woman's got a really low-cut top on and her breasts are all jiggling and exposed, at some level I think she's aware that she's projecting an image of a generous woman.
What do you mean?
By her clothing choice, she's communicating to the men around her, look how accessible I am. Look at how open and unguarded I am with my breasts. These things, they're here for you to play with. That's why I'm displaying them so openly. And it's going to have the effect that she wants. She'll have lots of male attention.
This makes me really uncomfortable. If I understand you right, you're saying that women who expose their cleavage are encouraging men to objectify them.
Definitely. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. It's obvious. Women consider the impact that their clothing choices are going to have on men. I'm not saying that it dictates all of their fashion choices, but to deny that women ever consider the impact that their clothes are going to have on the men around them is ridiculous.
It sounds like you're encouraging men to view women as sexual objects, and from there it's a slippery slope to allowing men to sexually assault women.
I find that argument absurd, and let me speak clearly so there's no possibility of misunderstanding me. Even if a woman's breasts are exposed, that doesn't give you permission to go up and grab them. If you want to touch a woman's breasts, you need to obtain consent first.
Okay, so you're not an apologist for men who commit sexual assault. You're just pointing out that women who expose their breasts are inviting themselves to be sexualized.
Yes, and it's not even all women. But you can basically guarantee that that girl at the club, in her heels, makeup, low-cut top, and she's squeezing her breasts together, she wants men to notice. She's using her breasts to get something that she really values, which is male attention.
So where does plastic surgery fit into all of this?
Well, there are women who actively undergo surgery so that they can enhance their breasts. There might be other reasons for why women get breast jobs, but I'm not aware of them.
But men will get disappointed when they find out that the breasts aren't real.
Many men will, but not all of them. There is a very specific fetish that some men have for fake breasts.
Why would men be aroused by fake breasts?
Well, think about what fake breasts symbolize. They're the ultimate plaything for a man. I mean, practically speaking, what she's gone through to get those was a huge inconvenience, but she did so just for the pleasure of men. What could be a greater symbol of feminine generosity than that?
I guess so. I would just imagine that they would feel weird.
They probably do, but remember, our sexuality is not only guided by physical sensations. Even if they do feel weird, there are some men who will be turned on by fake breasts just because of what they represent psychologically.
I bet for some guys it's just a status thing. They like that their partner got plastic surgery because they want to be known as the guy who's got the girlfriend with the biggest breasts.
Right, like I said before, every individual is different. Each person's sexual preferences are going to be specific and unique, but sometimes it can be useful to talk in generalities of what's usually true, as in the case of large breasts and generosity.
Okay, so why talk about this? We've just had an entire conversation about big breasts. Why is this important?
Because I feel like the culture has no understanding of why certain things have a sexual appeal for men, and rather than try and understand the psychological nuances that drive particular sexual preferences, they find it easier to just condemn it.
So you think that men who profess a sexual preference for women with big breasts are somehow made to feel guilty, that there's something wrong with them?
Definitely. If a man was to tell his female friends that he likes women with big breasts, he opens himself up to any number of criticisms. They might call him shallow or superficial, or even accuse him of being some kind of creep or pervert.
But you say that he has nothing to be ashamed of.
Of course not. And I find it really disappointing that women in this culture make so little effort to understand the male point of view. When I was doing my street interviews, even though there were exceptions, on the whole I found that women had taken almost no time to try and appreciate or empathize with the male perspective.
So you think that male sexuality is misunderstood by women?
Often that's the case, but often it's even worse than that. Male sexuality isn't even deemed important enough to warrant an attempt to understand it. See, our society has a vested interest in not understanding the perspective of men, because if we really listen to all of men's pain and suffering, then we need to make some changes.
But then, why don't we make that change?
Because there are those that benefit from keeping the system the way that it is, because dehumanizing men makes it more morally acceptable to continue to exploit them.
Whoa, that's getting pretty heavy. What's that got to do with men liking big breasts?
Well, it's too easy to laugh at men who like big breasts and write it off as some animal instinct. Because if we really took the time to understand the psychological cause of this particular sexual preference, then we'd be forced to confront the fact that men's experience of the feminine is often cold, withholding, and selfish. If we really understood that, then we'd need to reevaluate the way that women are treating men in this culture.
I did not expect a conversation about big breasts to go in this direction. The way you speak about it, even this simple sexual preference seems to have so much moral significance.
But that's my point. It's not a simple sexual preference. Your sexuality reveals the truth, even when your mind tries to obscure it. By examining your sexuality, you look through a window to the very core of what you believe. And big breasts, they're just the beginning. I want to do a whole series of videos that examine male sexual preferences and what they reveal psychologically.
I look forward to it, though we'll have to save those conversations for another time. Right now, I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. Do you think it's true that big breasts are a symbol of feminine generosity? Do you think our society has a vested interest in not understanding the psychological significance of male sexual preferences? Let us know in the comment section below.
Also, be sure to hit that like button and make sure you've subscribed to the channel. If you want to support the creator, please consider checking out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description box below.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you again next time.